What if the reason your brain never fully turns off, not during dinner, not during conversations you actually want to be present for, not during the moments that should feel like rest, not even during the hours the night is supposed to give you? What if that specific relentlessness wasn't a feature of your personality but a symptom of something that has been quietly escalating? Something that started small, that was manageable in the beginning, that you adapted to gradually without noticing you were adapting, until the adaptation became the baseline and the baseline became you, and somewhere in that process you lost the ability to tell the difference between a brain that is working and a brain that cannot stop. And here is the part that makes it worse without you realizing it's making it worse. Every time you try to push through the noise, every time you add more to the day, stay busier, move faster, fill every available gap with something so the brain has somewhere to point its energy, you are not managing the problem. You are feeding it. The thing you're doing to cope is the thing accelerating the condition. And you've been doing it for so long, so automatically, that it feels like discipline, like function, like the only available option. It isn't. There is something else available. And it doesn't require you to think less or care less or become a quieter version of yourself. It requires understanding what the never stopping is actually doing to you and why it has been escalating. Because once you see that clearly, the way out of it stops being mysterious. Here's what's actually happening. A brain that never turns off is not a busy brain. That distinction matters more than it sounds. A busy brain has periods of high activity followed by genuine down-regulation. It engages intensely, then releases. It works hard, then rests. The activation and the recovery alternate in a rhythm that is sustainable because the recovery is real. The downtime is actual downtime. The quiet is actual quiet. A brain that never turns off has lost that rhythm. The down-regulation doesn't come. The recovery doesn't complete. The activation level stays elevated through situations that don't require elevation, through moments designed for rest, through the night itself. And without genuine recovery, each new period of activation starts from a higher baseline than the one before. So over time, the minimum becomes what the maximum used to be. The resting level climbs. The nervous system's set point moves upward. And what once would have felt like an unusually activated state starts to feel like ordinary, like just how things are. This is the escalation. Not a dramatic worsening. A slow, consistent, almost imperceptible upward drift in the baseline level of neural activation that is maintained even when nothing in the environment is demanding it. And the brain, running at this elevated level continuously, begins to generate its own content to justify the activation. Because a brain in high gear needs something to be in high gear about. So it finds things. It generates concerns. It constructs problems from ambiguity. It keeps unresolved questions live and active when they could be resting. It maintains the activity level by feeding itself whatever it needs to stay running. The thoughts are not producing the state. The state is producing the thoughts. And that reversal of what you assumed was the direction of causation changes everything about how you address it. Here is where it gets more serious, and I'm not saying this to frighten you. I'm saying it because understanding the consequences is what turns this from something you've been tolerating into something you take seriously enough to actually change. A brain that runs continuously without genuine recovery does not just feel exhausting. It changes. Not permanently, not irreversibly, but measurably and progressively in ways that affect your daily functioning in ways you may already be noticing without having connected them to this. The first thing that changes is your perception of threat. A chronically activated nervous system recalibrates its threat detection threshold downward. Things that would have registered as neutral begin to register as slightly concerning. Things that would have been mildly concerning begin to feel significantly threatening. The world starts to look slightly more dangerous than it did before, not because the world changed but because the instrument you're using to assess the world has been reset by chronic activation to a more sensitive setting. You are not becoming more anxious because your life is getting harder. Your life is starting to look harder because your brain is now measuring it with a miscalibrated instrument. The second thing that changes is your working memory and cognitive clarity. A brain in continuous high activation mode allocates significant resources to the vigilance system, to the scanning, the monitoring, the preparation, and those resources are borrowed from somewhere. From the prefrontal cortex. From the systems responsible for clear thinking, flexible problem-solving, nuanced judgment, and the ability to hold multiple things in mind simultaneously and see the relationships between them. Which means the more your brain runs without stopping, the less sharp your thinking becomes. The brain that is supposedly working all the time is actually becoming progressively less effective at the work that matters. The never stopping is not productivity. It is productivity's impersonator. The third thing that changes is your emotional range. Chronic neural overactivation flattens the experience of positive emotion while amplifying the experience of negative emotion. Good things begin to feel muted. Enjoyment becomes shallower. The things that used to generate genuine pleasure or relief or lightness begin to produce only a pale version of those experiences. While simultaneously, discomfort sharpens. Frustration intensifies. Small difficulties carry more weight. And this shift, the flattening of the positive and the amplification of the negative, happens so gradually that you may have already accommodated it without recognizing it as a change. You may have concluded that this is just who you are now. That enjoyment was something that belonged to an earlier version of your life. That the lightness you remember is simply gone. It's not gone. It has been systematically suppressed by a nervous system that has been running without recovery for too long. And it returns when the system gets the recovery it needs. Here is the first intervention. Not a technique for managing the running brain. An interruption to the escalation itself. The escalation is fed by the absence of genuine downregulation. And the absence of genuine downregulation is fed by the absence of anything in your day that constitutes a real signal to the nervous system that activation is no longer required. Not a relative reduction in activity. Not a slightly quieter version of the same level of engagement. A genuine, physiological signal that the high alert mode can release. That signal has a specific biological pathway, and it begins with the exhale. Not as relaxation. As a direct input to the vagal nerve that tells the parasympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for genuine recovery, that it is safe to engage. A long, slow, complete exhale, longer than the inhale, activates that pathway in a way that no amount of deciding to relax or trying to calm down ever will. Because deciding and trying are cortical activities. They happen in the thinking brain. And the activation that needs to be interrupted is subcortical. It lives below the thinking brain and it does not respond to the thinking brain's instructions. It responds to the body's signals. But one exhale is not enough. One exhale is a sentence in a language your nervous system needs to hear in paragraphs. 3 to 5 minutes of slow, complete, extended exhales, not dramatic breathing, not breathwork as performance, just consistently emphasizing the out-breath over the in-breath for a sustained period, begins to shift the physiological state in a measurable direction. The heart rate variability changes. The cortisol curve begins to bend. The muscles receive less instruction to maintain contraction. The activation level begins, genuinely, to come down. This is the signal your nervous system has been waiting for. Not rest as the absence of activity. Rest as a specific physiological input that your body actually registers as permission to downregulate. The second intervention goes directly at the content the brain generates to keep itself running. Because the escalating activation produces thoughts, and the thoughts feel like they require engagement, and the engagement maintains the activation, and the activation produces more thoughts. The cycle is self-sustaining, and the exit from the cycle is not better thoughts. It is withdrawing the engagement, not through suppression, not through distraction, through recognition. The specific, practiced recognition that what you are looking at in this moment is content the brain generated to justify its own activation level, not information about something that genuinely requires your attention right now. The question that creates that recognition is simple. Is this thought requiring something from me right now, in this actual moment? Not eventually. Not in general. Right now, today, in the next hour? Is there an action this thought is pointing me toward that is available and real and would actually address what the thought is about? If yes, take the action or schedule it specifically and close the file. If no, if the thought is about something that cannot be acted on today, or something uncertain that cannot be resolved by thinking about it, or something that belongs to a version of the future that doesn't exist yet, then what you are looking at is the brain feeding its own activation level. Content generated not because the content is urgent, but because the running system needs something to run on. And you can see it as that. Without fighting it. Without suppressing it. Just recognizing it for what it is and withdrawing the engagement that the recognition reveals is unnecessary. Not every thought deserves the full cost of your attention. And a brain that has been running on escalating activation has been spending that cost on thoughts that were never actually worth it. There is something specific about how the never-stopping brain affects your relationship with other people that I want to name because I think it goes unrecognized and it matters in ways that compound. A brain that never turns off is a brain that is partially elsewhere in almost every interaction. It is engaged on one channel while another channel runs the background processing. And the people who are trying to reach you across that divided attention, the people who love you, who need you to be actually present rather than functionally present, they feel it. They may not name it. They may not even consciously register what's missing. But there is a quality of contact that's only available when someone is fully in the interaction, not managing it from a slight distance while the rest of their processing runs elsewhere. And that quality of contact has been less available than it should be. Not because you don't care. Because the brain hasn't been able to fully arrive. And this creates a specific loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone. The loneliness of being with people and still feeling slightly separate. Of knowing that something is slightly off in the quality of connection without being able to explain why. Of sensing that you are present but not quite here, in a way that is felt but not nameable and therefore not addressable. The brain coming down from its elevated activation level, the genuine recovery rather than the managed continuation, allows presence that the running state cannot produce. Not because you become more extroverted or more expressive or more anything, because you become more actually here. And here is where connection happens. Here is the only place it ever has. There's one last thing I want to give you before we close, and it's the most important reframe available in everything I've said today. You have probably been treating the never-stopping brain as evidence of something about your personality. Your intensity. Your conscientiousness. The way you engage with things that matter. And you have probably, on some level, been slightly protective of it. Because if the brain running all the time is what makes you thorough, what makes you reliable, what makes you the person who doesn't miss things and doesn't drop things and stays on top of everything, then slowing it down feels like becoming less than what you are. But here is what the never-stopping brain has actually been costing you in the currency that thoroughness and reliability were supposed to earn. It has been costing you the clarity that genuinely good thinking requires. It has been costing you the emotional range that makes life worth the effort of showing up for it. It has been costing you the presence that is the only thing the people who matter to you actually need from you. It has been costing you the sleep that is the only process capable of maintaining the very cognitive function the running was supposed to produce. The brain that never stops is not working harder than a brain that recovers. It is working worse, at higher cost, with diminishing returns, while convincing you through the sheer experience of activity that the activity is the same as productivity. It isn't. Recovery is not the opposite of performance. Recovery is what makes performance possible. Downregulation is not the enemy of good thinking. It is the condition that good thinking requires. You are not going to think less by letting the brain rest. You are going to think better, more clearly, more accurately, with more of the prefrontal bandwidth that the vigilance system has been borrowing without your permission. The things you were trying to achieve by keeping the brain running, the thoroughness, the reliability, the not missing things, those are more available in a brain that has actually recovered than in one that has been running past the point where running is still productive. The brain that never turns off is not protecting you. It is escalating a condition that is making everything progressively harder. And the escalation only goes one direction until something genuinely interrupts it. You have that something now. The exhale. The recognition. The withdrawal of engagement from the thoughts that were never worth the cost. The genuine physiological signal that tells the system something it has been waiting, underneath everything, to be told. That the running can stop. That the activation can come down. That recovery is not a reward you haven't earned yet, but a biological requirement that has been overdue for longer than you know. Your brain is not broken. It is overrun. And overrun systems recover when they finally receive the input they need to begin coming back down. Start with the exhale. Right now. All the way out. Longer than the inhale. Until the lungs are genuinely empty. That's the signal. That's where it begins. And the beginning, finally, is here.